She set the bar really high. So we may have to bring it down a notch or two. I'll start with bringing it down, and you can bring it back up.
Yeah.
So
Cindy and I just met, by the way, but I
Yes.
feel like we're great old friends, so we're going to sit up here and banter, and we'd love to involve you too with our banter and get some questions rolling. But Cindy, over to you.
once we learn a few things from each other, you may just say, I actually have a nugget I can take back to my organization. But I told Heather, I said, can we just make this a round table and invite everybody to the front? Let's just sit in a circle and not hold hands. But she said, do you remember we just took our masks off? Did you recall that people being in close proximity is very recent? And I said, oh, and that would come from my maybe high touch, literally, how I operate. And speaking of, just kicking off good hiring practices for building corporate culture. Someone said in the back of the room that Ryan is the brains, and Ryan actually happens to be in here, and I'm the heart.
Who's Ryan? I mean, I know who Ryan is, but who's Ryan?
Ryan is our.
I know you're right. I recognize you from photos, Ryan, but just so everyone in the room knows who Ryan is. Who's Ryan?
But I can actually say that Denali is full of heart. And I have this anatomically incorrect heart that beats and pulses in one of our new hire engagements called Base Camp. And it's because it is really people and how our heart feels is at the center of how and what we do. And as I even ask people, what is your greatest asset that you bring to Denali that's going to be differentiating when we are in the interview process? People are very quick to talk about their technical skills that they have spent years and years and years building, and they wish to accelerate those by coming to Denali. But it's really interesting when you transition that and you say, set aside all of your professional success for a moment, and let's just talk about you as the human being. Nothing related to career. What is your single greatest asset as a human being? What would your family say about you? And it's almost as though their disposition completely changes, and they release a big breath of air, and they become very comfortable. And they say, wow, I didn't plan for that. And I said, but it's our humanity, and this is as important as the technical skills that you bring, because you're not going to check your empathy at the door, or your compassion, or your love of cooking. Even we'll embrace that too at Denali. You're not going to check that at the door. It's just a beautiful weave of how you're going to do what you do. And that's as important to us as we build and as we evolve as an organization, to understand what else are we getting. And then you hear the story of empathy and or compassion and or why am I a great dad? Why am I, what is my spectrum of pain to possibility, and even connecting with the purpose of Denali. And so I think the good hiring practice, it starts in the candidate identification phase and how you interact with your talent, and really embracing what is special and unique about that person, other than a skill set that is going to clearly link to a defined business need that we have at the time. And so to me, good hiring, it starts at who are you as a human being? Because that humanity is really going to carry us. And it's interesting, when we are doing something, both of us, in our like companies are doing something so hard, in our case, working to defeat degeneration. When you do something so hard, it's that humanity that you allow yourself to, in some ways, bear one another's burdens and recognize and respect how hard someone is working day to day, and to give them that credit and to help support them and try to problem solve together. And so it really starts at who are you as a human being? So that would be my starting part for a good hiring.
I love that. I'm gonna riff on that. We can try bouncing off each other. I'm gonna back up from where you started a little bit and maybe express what I'm hearing as an underlying belief that resonates with me. I think when hiring goes wrong, as companies, we get too focused on the business and business outcomes and getting the talent in, right? And it's natural because you need to grow the business and there's work to be done and you need the talent. And often some of the metrics even are a disservice to us, right? They're helpful to a point, but things like time to hire, quality of candidate, quality of hire, and those matter. But in that, you lose sight of the fact that every single person that experiences your company as a candidate matters. And very few of them are going to get job offers. And if you don't orient right, you're only going to focus on the people that get job offers. And to Cindy's point, you lose an opportunity for every single candidate to experience your brand, your culture, to allow them a chance to see that you care about their humanity. And that matters. So that matters, right? Every single one of these people. And maybe we riff on culture for a little bit. Like, we could talk about hiring till the cows come home, but hiring in service of building your corporate culture, you got to know what your culture is before you tie hiring practices to it. And so I'll start. I'll riff a bit on culture, and then we can maybe circle it back from culture to hiring. But so there's many ways to describe culture. I'll describe it as the character and personality of your company. And another way to say it is, it's the sum of actions of every single person all day long. Everyone creates culture. Culture is about actions. It's about behaviors. It's actually not about beliefs. It's easy to write down a lot of things that you believe in, but at the end of the day, how you act, and now I'm stealing the title of the Ben Horowitz book, but what you do is who you are, right? How you act, that's your culture. And so you have to back up and ask yourself, for the mission that we're trying to achieve and the strategy, which is the path to that mission, what behaviors, what actions best serve us? And they're going to be different. They have to be different. We have different missions. We're building different kinds of companies. And those behaviors, you codify those in your values. And so if I'm going to talk about good hiring practices, the first thing I'm going to say is I can't talk about that until you've clarified what your values are as a company and made it clear why those values serve your mission. So I'll hand it off to you. We can kind of go from here. Values.
I know values. I'm going to hold off on values for a minute because that's basically, the whole framework of Denali and our purpose. I'll rewind just a few years before Denali, and I was at a brilliant organization, and I spent many, many years at Genentech Roche, and during that time, before the integration with Roche, we were growing and building, and I joined the organization. It was just roughly just over 4,000 people, and at the time of integration, I think it was at 12,000. And so we had, extensive period of growth in a very short period of time. And then we started getting these surveys. They were called geo surveys, and it was basically, do you identify with the culture? I was like, I lost it. If you survey people, it's gone. Because, as we have discussed, you have to be ahead of these things. And I'm not here to say that surveys aren't valuable input opportunities. What I am saying, when you start to talk about culture, there is something I think almost intuitive when you start to feel it. You need to get ahead of it and be really proactive. When we had the opportunity to begin building Denali, we almost had a maybe little scar tissue from all those geo surveys, but we avoided the use and the even the definition of culture, because we said it's our environment, and as soon as we start to define the culture, we're asking people to conform in ways that may mute their uniqueness and individuality. And as a result of that, we didn't want to do that. And so this is where we asked every person who came to Denali, what connects you to our purpose, and what is your tagline? Nike says, just do it. Facebook used to tell their engineers, go fast and break things. Those were their taglines, and people can unify under those. And we are here to defeat degeneration, but it really opens up a completely new dynamic and element of an individual when you care about what's important to them in their tagline. And this is where you begin to realize and connect people to the purpose through, why are you unique and special to the organization? And how are we going to leverage that in this environment as we continue to grow? And as soon as we feel we stop asking about that uniqueness and that individuality that also comprise a big part of our diversity of perspective, then we might need to send out culture surveys because the dynamic is going to move and shift. But we like to think of our environment as, similar to as how we evolve our science. It continues to iterate and to grow and to evolve. And so we have an evolving environment more than we talk about culture. And then we get back to our values. So there you have it.
I love it. I love it. And just to share counterpoints, we actually survey people twice a year. And so, and Cindy and I were talking about this before, surveying people about culture, about environment, it is looking in the rearview mirror a little bit. If you're waiting to run a survey to figure out if you have a problem at your company, it's too late, right? It's too late. You need listening posts, you need information flowing to you long before you do a survey. And there's other reasons we run the survey, but so values, I love that idea of people having taglines, and maybe I'll just pull that thread through a little bit to talk about the power of diversity and talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and values at the same time. These things matter from the very beginning of creating a company. You can't wait a year, you can't wait until you're 100 people or even 50 people or 20 people to decide that they matter. It's too late, because the minute you start building your company, whether you're intentional or not about these things, they are happening. They are happening. And so figuring out sooner rather than later where you stand on them matters. To speak a little bit about the values themselves, what you really need to do is codify them. Like I said, get really clear on, based on your mission, what behaviors and mindsets are going to get you there. And the way you pull them into hiring, there's many ways. I'll explain one, is you very explicitly hire, in our case, the language we use is for values fit, not for culture fit. So there's a ton of research out there that shows if you start throwing that language around, we need to hire for culture fit, you are just introducing a petri dish of bias, because what happens is culture fit is a big umbrella for every single person to say, I want to hire someone like me, because that feels super comfortable and that's going to fit the culture. So you want to strip that out of hiring. You want to focus on values fit, and within that you want to focus on what are the essential values that I need to hire for with every candidate. And in our case, so we're decoding biology to radically improve lives. That is an audacious mission. It's tech-enabled drug discovery. We can't rely on how things were done in the past. We need, in every single function, bold thinkers, people that are willing to appreciate but challenge convention, willing to take risks and understand constraints and what constraints they should honor and which ones they shouldn't. And so we interview for boldness. We interview for humility and curiosity, because we are never going to do something that's never been done before if we don't come to the table with a growth mindset, right? And we interview for a bias for action, because we were talking about patients actually, look, a lot of us say this, patients are waiting. It's very real. Go sit down with the patient. Go sit down with the people that love patients. Look in their eyes and it will change you, right? And so we hire people with a bias for action because we can't wait. And so those are our three. We have 5 values, but those are the 3 areas of focus for us, and for every candidate in our interview process, there's someone assessing for values fit. And I'll say one more thing just about competencies broadly and hand it back to you. So that the way I describe that, someone's assessing for that values fit, language that's often used is competencies, competency-based hiring, which means you get very clear for every role what are the necessary skills and capabilities, including values that you're going to assess on those, assess on nothing more. If you create shifting criteria, research-backed, that's one of the #1 ways that you introduce bias into the hiring process. You shift the criteria. Oh, but that candidate's got XYZ, and that would be so great at our company, right? But was XYZ essential to the role when the role was created? I have a ton of passion for blocking bias in these things. Any people decision at a company is a petri dish for bias, and the way you block bias is creating really objective criteria-based constructs to guide decisions. So I'm off the,
We can go off the
hobby.
We can go off the tracks real quick here.
Yeah.
We start talking about this.
Yeah. I should check the time too, because we can open it up for questions at some point too.
We, as people, We often look at data too, in addition to the scientists in the room who are innovating and developing new diagnostics and therapies. And when you think about unconscious bias, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't want to misquote this, but I think the brain takes in 12,000 pieces of information like every minute. And so what the brain has to do is to create these shortcuts, which then become biases. And some of those, we translate those into unconscious bias and why people begin to frame thoughts and ideas and patterns in the way that they do. And in organizations where you have a lot of people who look and feel and see things the same way without that, different lived experience, you're going to get a lot of the same think, which is, you might say, well, that's not a bad thing as long as it's really good and highly productive. It's kind of like you don't know what you're missing, though, because you've never achieved that next level of understanding and appreciation. We have 4 core values, 2 foundational values and 2 action values. Trust and unity are our foundational values, and grit and growth are our action values. Similar to Recursion, this is everything to us. I mean, everybody in the organization, I think 100% of all, we call ourselves Denalians. If you ask, Alex Schuth, one of our other co-founders, he might call us Denalians. I said, we're not aliens, we are actually Denalians. But these values are at the core, and they are so specific and central to our success that virtually, science doesn't prevail and move forward without, trust in the data. There's so many applications to these values, and they're central. People thrive at Denali because of the values and demonstration of those values, and they also are invited to, go into a different environment where how they place value on different measures of behavior are inconsistent with our values. And so people understand how important this is, even to the extent, I want you to walk away with some concrete maybe opportunities of things that you could implement in your organizations, and here's one. We have, get your pen out, we have a Employee of the Month Club, and it isn't actually like Jelly of the Month Club. It is a parking spot. In our parking structure, you're like, really? This is all you have? There's some humor in this, but in addition to that, really emphasizing the benefit of our values and how you earn the parking spot of the month is that employees send recognition and examples of individuals that they work with demonstrating a Denali value. And we share those, at our all-company meeting every other week. And individuals, there's so much, pride is not the right word because it's not pride in the sense of maybe pride, but there's so much gratification and respect for an individual who is recognized for demonstrating a Denali value. It's the way and the currency in which we are going to actually have success with patients is by demonstrating and living our values. I want to go back, though, to the concept of, who is living your values and the composition of your teams and individuals in your organizations. When we look around at one another, again, there may be differences in our age. We have clear generation bands of who in our organization is going to think a certain way. I don't even know what all the bands are anymore. We even argue if we're millennial. I know I'm not a millennial. When you put a 5 in front of your number of where you are on the age scale, you're like, you're not a millennial. I fake it. I want to fake it, but we're Gen X? Yeah. Okay, we're Gen X. Okay. But within that, you have your generation bands, you have your gender recognition, you have ethnicity, you have, in terms of just even how you, your orientation. There are so many ways that we are recognized, and how do we acknowledge that? We have to know about it within our organizations. And we have a unity in diversity group at Denali that looks at how are we going to live our values through recognition of the lens of diversity. And this team is comprised of African Americans, Latinx, LGBTQ+, Asian, Indian, from a gender perspective, females. It is extraordinary just within that small group when we have the opportunity to talk about our values and how can we, one, reach out into our community. How can we really make a fast forward footprint within STEM? How can we, within our organizations, just think about clinical trial engagement and enrollment from a diverse perspective? This is it. I mean, this is, when we talk about what's coming and what has come, this is where we have a huge opportunity to live our values, is through our diverse perspectives. And so I would, maybe segue it over to you, because I know we both feel very passionate about this.
Yeah, I'll try and I'll pick the baton up, and in the spirit of talking about diversity and building diverse orgs in the context of hiring, I'll get pretty tactical for a minute. I talked about that downstream part of the process, like when you're assessing people and making the decisions, you want to block bias, you want to hire the most qualified candidate. Upstream, if you're really committed to building a diverse organization, upstream, that's where the work happens. You have to source diverse candidates, underrepresented candidates. You have to understand where talent pools exist and go and find them. And then the way this like prickly beast of sort of unconscious bias and other blockers and stereotypes in society work is that if we don't work against them, we're going to end up with homogenous slates, candidate slates. And so we need to build processes that yield a diverse slate. And we've gone so far at Recursion, actually, to have metrics tied to our slates, which mean that we're not going to move to making a final candidate decision without exceptions, without having, in our case, and we've evolved it over years, most recently it's been at least one woman or non-binary candidate on the final slate, and at least one Black, Indigenous, or person of color on the final slate. And if you don't, like, for us, diversity is about, it's really integral to achieving the mission. It's Cindy mentioned this, right? The research shows that diverse teams, heterogeneous teams, that diversity of thought actually yields higher performance. It's been proven again and again. It is not comfortable because people are not going to think like you. And you want to build companies like this if you're serious about doing fundamentally like big and transformational things within this world. Diversity is going to be one of your key levers. And so I'm going to back up a little bit. So one thing I want to do, just back up and look at the whole hiring funnel. One analog to hiring, if you're familiar with sales, it's like a sales funnel, right? Like from the very top to the very bottom. And you can look at metrics across your funnel, where people fall off, where people of different genders fall off, where people of different races fall off. We've found by studying that, we've had instances where some of our take-home tests and our study, our hands-on assessments actually have been unfair or and unnecessarily challenging towards certain underrepresented groups. And being able to look at the data like that and then evolve your funnel so that there's equal opportunity at every stage for every gender and every race are going to yield the best outcomes. The other thing I want to say about the funnel is if we go all the way to the top of the funnel, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is how you talk about your company, right? It's really marketing to potential employees, to candidates. It's often referred to as employer branding. You can't get into employer branding until you're clear about who you are. Like, what's your culture? What's your value proposition? What's in it for people that join you? I mean, I could almost tell the story for Denali. Like, Cindy's given me so much gold about what I would get if I went to Denali, but how do you tell that story to people that might be considering Denali or considering Recursion? And do you deliver on that promise? You have to make some kind of promise to people that are going to come and talk to you about joining you, and then you have to deliver on the promise. And the last thing I'll share, and then I'll hand it back to you. Every source of research that I've ever read about what is most meaningful to people in terms of their time at a company ladder back to three things. And it's probably from like the depth of our humanity as a species. We seek impact. We seek making a change in the world. And this is why more and more why talent's choosing companies with purpose and making choices about where they spend their careers and choosing purpose over dollars, you know, and I think life sciences in general has a massive leg up over a lot of industries on this. People choose growth. They want to grow their careers. They want to know that there's going to be part of the equation where people invest in them. And then the last one is like a sense of belonging and community, that they're part of something, you know, and I don't want to steal your thunder. You should say the love thing, but like you go to a place that you love, I'm going to say it, and they love you back. Those are Cindy's words. But right, like, so impact, growth, and belonging. Like you have to really understand people on a deep level if you're going to design culture, design hiring processes, and know what they want. That's what they want. Yeah, I love it. Please.
So I think it's fantastic that you two are here at this conference to talk about good hiring practices, because in your entire career, you're always hiring someone. It's a hard thing to do, whether the fit is right or not right. Sometimes you don't know until the person gets here. Yeah. And so kudos to the conference that you two are here. But for something concrete for everyone, someone told me at one point in time, what, like the 5 top questions you should
Oh yeah,
ask
we can riff on questions all day.
So that has been the most impactful thing to me and my teams. Because we got everybody on the same page of what did they want to get across with this candidate, what did they want to hear before the candidate comes in, and they had a game plan. And then we asked the same question from all different ways and gathered the answers. So do you have any thoughts? Because I think people could use.
I love it.
Heather, will you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, you closed, I loved where you closed. How do you really interview people? And I think there was a specific ask to, can you make some real suggestions on specific questions? And I'll start with a bit of an abstract answer, and Cindy, I'm gonna trust you, like come in with some like real specific, but, so I'm gonna go back to the what I had shared about competencies, right? And I didn't pull that thread all the way through, so I'm gonna pull it through. Let's imagine we've got a role, and we're trying to fill that role. We've identified maybe 4 technical skills and 2 leadership skills, something like influence and communication, and then we've got values, right? The values. So now we've got 6 or 7 competencies we want to assess. The interview panel needs to get together, assign those competencies, right? So not every interviewer is focused on assessing the same thing. Every interviewer should assess 2 or 3 things at the most, my take, and that whatever they're assigned, they should get really clear on the questions they're going to ask to assess those things. In our case for values, because every single candidate's getting assessed on values, we have a 2-page cheat sheet at the company that basically hands on a platter to every hiring manager and interview panel for those 3 values I mentioned. Here's like 5 different examples of questions you can ask. So I'll give you an example in this context, and then I'll hand it. You know, so I mentioned that we assess for bold. We assess for bold thinking, supportive of bold environments, you know, willingness to be bold in every single candidate. Roles are different, right? Like, do you want your person in legal being super bold? Maybe, maybe not, but maybe you want them to support a bold culture, right? And so you have different types of questions honoring the different functions. Some of the questions will be, and look, I love behavioral-based interviewing questions, right? Give me an example of a time. There's a lot of evidence that that's going to, you know, the hypothetical, like what would you do if research says not very helpful? What you actually want to know is what they've done. So give me an example of a time when you fought or you challenged the constraints you had at a company to do something that you thought was necessarily bold to achieve a goal, you know? Or for a different type of role, you might have a question like, give me an example of a time when you supported a colleague that had a really bold, audacious idea, and you supported them in getting sort of, you know, interest in the organization for that, you know. And so it's just, what's the competency, and then what's the question that assesses it? So Cindy, over to you.
I'm going to break the mold. We do
Please,
not do
please.
competency-based interview.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
At
Look,
Denali.
different companies. Can I
We-
back up for 1 sec?
Yes.
I'm going to say something. It's good to be different. Companies should be different, and you should design these systems, whether it's hiring or performance management or whatever it is, based on your culture and your mission. And so it's actually, it's super fun that we do things
I
differently.
know.
So
it is,
go.
It's great. So if I'm going to give you a rundown, person comes in, they have a whole list of what is this? I call it an Instagram view of their CV, and everything awesome that's ever happened in their life is accounted for there. The first, I think one of the questions is, what is your single greatest technical asset that is going to be differentiating? That you're going to actually contribute. It tells how and what, there's the action, and if you use the STAR model, you're getting to all of that with that single question. Then I ask, I already shared with you the humanity aspect. What is your single greatest asset as a human? How are you going to behave here? Then what is an example of a time in your life when you learned a valuable life lesson that you often refer to when making important decisions? It's like, I screwed up, it didn't go well, and how do I often refer to that? And or when is the time that I learned something about how to connect and communicate with teams, and I take that on because it was something valuable that I learned that I'm going to impart here. So it can be, both in the plus and the negative column. And then, I'm not gonna go to 5. I'm going to go to 4. And the last one is about what connects you to our purpose. Because ultimately that, to me, and I think to most of us at Denali, is fundamentally one of the single greatest questions, is what connects you to our purpose. And if I could indulge just how this plays out, I'm going to go back to our taglines. And if you want to know why I sit up here, why Heather sits here, it's because, and or why many of you do what you do, it's because you have a connection to our purpose. And when you understand that about a person, I find that I have to ask less competency questions because it's revealed in what a person is compelled to do to satisfy, their opportunity to have an impact and to move the needle. I'm going to try to do this and behave myself in 32 seconds. When my son was 6 months old, he was diagnosed with what at that time they noted as a terminal illness. It was a rare disease. They said he's not going to make it. Of course, as young, naive parents, we went in search of better news, and we were fortunate to find that. We found others who would give us an interim solution when he turned 5, and we did our high-level analysis. The cardiologist said, "You're lucky, but he's not going to make it. You should prepare for a short mortality." When he turned 12, they said, "You're keeping up with the science. But again, this is not going to end well." When he turned 17, and we sat in the hospital, and the doctors had left us, we knew we had hit a pivot point. And it's a moment in time where you happen to remember everything that's going on. You remember the color of the sheets, the smell in the room, and the look on this kid's face. And he said, "I'm tired. I want to go now. I don't want to do this anymore." And he said, "But before I go, I have a question." He said, "Have I done enough good?" And as being older, much more selfish parents, we weren't willing to accept that either. Said, "No, you have to stay." Being an obedient kid, he followed through. But it was because along the way, there was a scientist willing to run one more Western and get definitive data. There was a person in regulatory affairs that was willing to run an emergency access protocol to get an authorization on a drug that wasn't indicated for a pediatric use. It was a clinical development team that was looking at inclusion criteria and how they wrote a clinical protocol. That 25-year-old kid today who graduated from the U, college All-American, and is now out doing wonderful things, it's because people were connected to a purpose, and they were relentless, and they didn't give up. And that's all I need to know when I go to work every day. I can say, have I done enough good? That's my purpose, and that's what I need to know when I connect with every single person. So my last question to every person is, how do you connect to our purpose? That's what I need to know. And in that answer, I can pretty much survey and understand how we're going to get there, and is this the right fit? Now,